Richard, our question for today is about suffering. And the question is it possible to live life without suffering?
Is it possible to live life without suffering? It's possible to live life without suffering, but I think I would probably want to say the suffering's a given. The question is, what is your awareness of it? Suffering originates, the source of suffering comes with the apparent birth of the individual in the field of space and time. At that point, we are experientially viewing the world like the drop parted from the ocean. We're not truly separate, but we experience ourselves as separate. Wouldn't it be wonderful to live in a culture where children were brought up to realize from the very beginning they were part of the ocean and not have installed in them the violence and fear of separation and division and conflict? So be it. We live in a time of conflict and separation, division and violence, and every definition we give to ourselves pits us up against another definition. It starts with I and you. And as soon as that's in place, there's suffering. Now, the child may grow up with an awareness that since everybody's doing it, it's okay. That's a popular one. It's been said for a long time. You know, if enough people want to do it, enough people agree with it, however stupid it is, somehow you better do it. So we're brought up in a community, a society, an international community now. Now we have the internet, the information age. There's more and more and more apparent eyes, all separate and all divided and all identified in some way with name, with religious affiliation, with nationality, with their family status, with their celebrity status or otherwise, with their occupation. It goes on and on and on. All of these things seem to define us, but really they're nails in the coffin, aren't they? The truth is you're a mystery. The truth is you're the ocean. The truth is you're everything, you're all. The truth is you're the illuminated field of life itself. You're not separate from anything. So it begins with a delusion. It begins with a mistake. It seems that our life in the world of appearances, space and time, begins with this fundamental mistake, this idea that this is you and you're going to progressively be defined in some kind of a way. And out of that definition, you will be pitted against other defined individual entities. This is suffering. In that sense, then, it's impossible to live your life without suffering, although many live their life without any awareness of suffering, because the consolation is we're all in the same boat. You know, life is hard. You know, life's difficult. We have opinions then as consolation, judgments as consolation. We have criticisms of life as consolation, and we can group together with other people with those kinds of biases and we can console each other, you'll notice that opinion, preference, criticism, judgment is a self-definition. It's a self-defining affair. And what you have to ask yourself about yourself and other people is, why would we do it? I mean, everything, broadly speaking, is sort of okay. Everybody's learning. Everyone's trying to get there. Everything is imperfect, in a sense. Everything's in process. What need then of criticism or judgment? We know when a child's growing, there's certain things we would expect of him or her. And we know perhaps instinctively that criticism, judgment isn't the way, isn't going to help, neither punishment, neither having strong opinions necessarily will help in any way the child to grow, and neither does it help the adult to grow. It turns out to be self-defining because we are desperate to maintain this individual perspective on life. It's as if we lost touch with this rather weak sense of self that we have, because it's not so tremendously strong, really. We have to maintain it every moment. We have to intensively upload it every morning when we open our eyes. So it's not that strong. It turns out that these opinions and judgments and biases and conflicts are self-defining, and they come out of the desperation of the suffering of the personal, individual, separate, divided and divisive ego self or ego processes. Because this is an activity constantly renewing itself. It's not an entity as such. It's a chimera, you know, it's a phantom. It's some sort of idea, and it's a conditioned idea. And it's a conditioned idea which we're desperate to hold on to and to reinforce in all sorts of ways. Almost everything you do, you might say, through the day, can be for the reinforcement of the ego self. And that is suffering. That is what suffering is. Now, all the usual things, setbacks in life and crises, negative circumstances of life can befall us, but we will have a very different experience of identification with those negative events through the ego self, the small self, the self of suffering, than we will from our true nature, which can most certainly withstand a succession of negative events, partly by not necessarily seeing events as negative, when to the ego self they would appear to be negative. So I've sometimes said spiritual practice has this great advantage when things are going well. We're happy, we're learning. When things are going badly, we're happy, we're learning. Very often more than when things are going well. You look back at your life as you get older and you can see that those setbacks, those so-called negative events or challenges, were the very ones you learnt most from. And actually the sunny days when there wasn't much friction, there wasn't much need for a push or the challenge, you were learning far less. You were just kind of floating a little bit, and nothing wrong with that. But neither is there anything wrong as such with the negative events from which you learn so very much. And perhaps not least of all, to learn that the negative events, so-called, are enhanced in their negativity, in their painfulness, and in your aversion towards them by the ego self, by your small self, by the suffering self. Because suffering draws suffering to itself. It must have suffering to survive. So you could say the establishment of the ego self as the very source of suffering requires its appetite to be appeased, to be fulfilled. It has to be fed suffering. And suffering is, in a sense, an interpretation of any given event. If you're not attached to the outcome, if you're not attached to the criticism, the judgment of this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. Instead, you sit back in your awareness and you say, well, good or bad or indifferent, I will learn from all things. I will embrace all things. I will even embrace joyfully death. And now, if I'm not afraid of that, if I can enter into that as an adventure, as an opening, as an embrace, as the fulfillment of life itself, what does the rest matter? Everything fulfills itself through its life and through its death. It's part of the process. But in spiritual practice, we look very seriously at dying in this psychophysical entity to life before a physical death. And through that surrender, we experience life in a basic background joyfulness. It doesn't mean that we go around smiling when things are awful. We behave like any normal human being. Some things are aberrations, some things are horrid. You cry, you feel sad, you feel angry sometimes. But behind that, or deeper than that, or enclosing that experience, is a very fundamental joy in all experience. Knowing how fleeting it is, knowing that life passes, knowing that life teaches, knowing that however sad or scary the present event is, we don't have to submit to suffering and identify with it. Suffering teaches us. So suffering isn't ourselves. In this sense, suffering can be transcended, or perhaps better put, accepted, embraced, brought in, assimilated. It can inhabit us. We don't have to be poisoned by it, and we don't have to be averse to it. Suffering, when you meet it intelligently, wisely, and from the heart, will fall. The suffering will fall and it will reveal a great gift. The suffering in its appearance will just peel away, and you will see within it the opportunity to deepen in love. That's the gift of suffering.